I'm very happy today to introduce to you Nancy Treaster. She began her career in the software industry managing strategy for a $1 billion global software company. After balancing her executive career with caring for family members with dementia, she co-founded The Caregiver's Journey with Sue Ryan to provide practical resources for dementia caregivers, a very specific field of service. She now combines her business expertise with hands-on caregiving experience to help families navigate the complex challenges of dementia care. Congratulations, Nancy, on the publishing of your article in Authority magazine titled Lessons Learned as a Caregiver. When did this huge shift from corporate manager to support to caregivers begin?
Well, the real beginning is about 26 years ago when my father got diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I would say we spent a good number of those years supporting my mother, who was his primary caregiver. But as it progressed, there was a lot of decisions and really support she needed that she just didn't feel like she could manage herself, which, was all fine. So we got used to that idea of, you've got to think through the caregiving and how to pay the bills and everything. It was just too much for her. So we took over a lot of that. But
Mhm.
about 10 years ago, my husband got diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia. It's a type of frontotemporal dementia. It's become quite well known now because Bruce Willis has this same kind of dementia, although it is pretty rare. That particular variant is pretty rare. And I, obviously did the best I could to find out everything I could about the disease. That's your natural inkling. And then about 4 years later, my father-in-law, who we care for, we moved them about 3 miles away from us about 16 years ago, got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The good
Well,
news is I was 4 years into my dementia experience at that point, so I was pretty much an expert. um, so lots of dementia experience over the last particularly 10 years, and then some obviously comes with Parkinson's as well.
so you mentioned one particularly hard lesson you learned from a hired caregiver. What was that?
And I love to scream this from the mountaintop, so I'm so glad you started with this. And it's one of the first lessons I tried to teach my mother-in-law when she was trying to figure out how to deal with my father-in-law, because it was so transformational to my journey. And that is, well, it starts with internalizing what they're going through. The reason, they're probably confused, they're frightened, they're agitated, it's mostly fear. Most of the outward emotions they show, even though it may come off as agitation or aggressiveness, it's usually comes from a place of fear.
Mhm.
They don't know what they're doing, or they're confused because you're upset because they're not doing it right, but they don't understand that they're not doing it right. And so I hired a part-time caregiver, and she came in. This is probably about 5.5 years into our dementia experience. And my husband couldn't shower by himself at that point or get dressed or anything. And so he's in the shower, and she's like, and my typical approach would have been, okay, now don't forget to use the soap. Okay, well, wash your hair. Okay, let me get in there and help you wash your back. Hers is like, oh, great job using the soap. Awesome. And then, everything he did, she just went on and on about in the most positive way. And I thought, she's crazy. It's actually, at first, I thought, what is happening?
Yeah.
But his reaction to her, and just to see the change in his face when she would talk to him, he was so filled with confidence and so filled with dignity and just the opposite of fear and frightened, right? And so Sue and I did an episode on that in the Caregiver's Journey in our podcast. And my aunt, actually, one of my older aunts, sent me a message. She's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be so much nicer to my care receiver now that I've heard you tell that story. But it's true, and it changes your whole approach. And if you can, and you don't just say the words, That was another thing I had to help my mother-in-law with. It's not just saying the words, because she'd say them and she'd have this really mad look on her face. I'm like, that's not working. You need to you put your whole body into it. You got to smile and have a pleasant look on your face and really feel excited about it. And when you say nice things to them and sound so positive, it actually makes you feel more positive too. And so there's a huge sort of secondary advantage.
I think it's a very basic human need to need encouragement and affirmation. And I can only imagine when you're ill and feeling insecure and
Mhm.
lack of confidence, how much more it would mean to hear those words of encouragement. You
Agree.
were a problem solver in your first profession. How did that translate into being a caregiver?
Almost nothing translated. That's the sad part. Only I'd say maybe it translated almost negatively at first, because I spent a lot of time in the beginning thinking I can solve all these problems, right? He doesn't know how to use the soap, or trying to get a PhD in his diagnosis by going on the internet, and I can get ahead of things because I'll know what's coming, which frankly is a little bit of a valid thing. I think if people understand what's coming next, then it almost helps them not be so surprised and be more prepared. But I came at it from that whole business perspective of there's a problem and we're going to solve it. And I didn't think I could solve his dementia diagnosis, but I felt like all the little things that were happening around us, surely I could fix those.
Yeah.
Another sort of dramatic turn in my caregiving journey was the day I decided I needed to let go of fixing everything and
That,
not feeling like I had to everything had to be just right. And that helped him, because I obviously wasn't getting so frustrated with everything we were trying to accomplish because he didn't participate in his part of it quite very well. But also it helped me because learning to let go, not really my nature, but it transitioned my mental approach to caregiving.
relieved you of the pressure of having to do everything just right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
I'm quoting you. You can't be an effective caregiver if you lose yourself in the process. What led up to that awareness?
Yes, very. That is also, you're hitting all my good things. That's also another thing I have to really teach. I try to teach people who are just entering caregiving. Most people as dementia caregivers are first time caregivers. They don't have any training or any experience. And frankly, not understanding that from day one, when you get a diagnosis, you walk into the doctor's office and the neurologist or the doctor says, you to your care receiver, your loved one, you have dementia of some sort. There'll usually be a diagnosis.
Yeah.
They got a diagnosis of dementia. You got a diagnosis of being a caregiver. You both have things that need to be attended to, and you both need caregiving through this journey. It's a team caregiving. Your responsibilities aren't just to caregive for your care receiver. Your responsibilities are to caregive for yourself as well. And if you can accept that you are part of this journey as a team and you're responsible for both people, not just focus 100% on them, you've got to focus on you as well, you will be in a much better place. And if you can learn that without finding out the hard way, like I did, that's always a better place to be.
I think any big diagnosis that a loved one receives impacts everyone. It's a diagnosis that the whole family gets or the relationship gets.
So true.
What are some ways that you learned to hang on to yourself during this journey?
Yes. I'd say the first thing, I went to see a therapist at one point in the early part of the journey, and just talking through what was happening and how I was feeling and everything you'd expect. And at one point in one of the early sessions, she says, I'm giving you permission to do what you want to do sometimes, to take care of you and do what you want to do sometimes. And at the time, I thought, okay. And I listened to her. But when I got home, it's funny. I think I needed somebody to give me permission.
Yes.
That word actually meant something to me. I
Yeah.
had permission. So sometimes just taking when your care receivers, they're good, they're sitting in front of the TV. I had cameras all through my house. So at all times I knew what was happening. To go sit in another room and read a book and just watch the camera for 15, 30 minutes because I needed a mental break, all good. I did try to schedule lunch with friends at least once every month to 6 weeks. So I was out and I had and frankly, not to talk about what was going on at home, but to not talk about what was going on at home.
Talk about something.
Something else, for goodness sakes. And I got pretty good at scheduling vacations. I would schedule 2 vacations a year with my sister. That's really over the last 4 years when my husband could no longer go anywhere. And that was a real break. I relied on my son early on to take care of his dad, even if it was just for 4 days. And then as the dementia progressed to the point where that was really not that was asking too much of him, of one of my sons, I'd hire a caregiver for those days while I just got away and went on vacation. So, to me, self-care is you have to give and then the other thing I'd say is you have to give yourself credit what you are doing. So sometimes self-care is just what gives you peace of mind. And if you need to go into the office and pay bills for 20 minutes because it's bugging you haven't paid bills, give yourself a pat on the back. You just did something for self-care. You gave yourself some peace of mind. So things that give you energy, things that give you joy, those are great. And sometimes it's just things that give you peace of mind because it needs to get done. Take a break and say, you know what? I'm going to give myself a moment of self-care and I'm going to do that thing that's really nugging at me in the back of my mind. And then be proud of yourself because you did it.
I really, really love that you didn't just give yourself a couple hour lunch with a friend or 20 minutes to read a novel, but you actually took several days to get a break away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Only imagine how refreshing and restorative that must have been for you.
Absolutely. And I think you feel guilty and you feel selfish. And the first time I went away with my sister for 4 days, I'm like, there's no way somebody else can do this for 4 days. Well, I came back. My husband was still alive. He was clean. The world had nothing happened. Nothing bad happened. And even if something bad happened, it's probably not something that could have happened if I was there as well. Right. So, and it really struck me. Oh, it's okay. Everything's still okay. And I left for 4 days and came back. So, I do suggest people take that time and try it and you'll be surprised. It's going to be okay.
It's not all up to you.
It isn't.
When my husband was dying of cancer, we had a year between the diagnosis and his death. And in the middle of that year, my sister invited me to go with her for a week,
Mm-hmm.
timeshare in Mexico. And Jim encouraged me to go.
Oh, that's nice.
It was so hard to leave, and yet, his daughter took care of him, and he was functional and fine, and it was such a good break for me.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
Absolutely.
imagine the grief of having the love of your life, your husband, no longer recognize you as his wife. It's
Mm-hmm.
as though he died or the marriage died, but he's still here.
Yeah.
How did you? I think there had to be a lot of grief in that
Mm.
process.
That's still the one story that makes me cry. Sorry. Because that was probably the hardest thing that ever happened through the whole thing.
Yes.
Hold on, get myself together. One day it's his mother's birthday and we're driving to pick up a birthday cake and he could still go out at this point. And we're driving. I'm driving because I've taken away the keys and he doesn't have a car anymore. And we're driving along. He says, "How do you like driving this car?" I said, "Well, okay, it's my car." I'm thinking, okay, well, I like it fine. And he's like, okay. And I thought that's an odd question, but whatever. He's got dementia, so who knows, right? A few minutes later, we're driving along and he says, where are we going? I said, "We're going to pick up a birthday cake for your mother." It's her birthday. Oh, you are going to love my parents. They are the nicest people.
Oh
I had
God.
been married to the man at that point for 30 years.
Oh gosh.
I thought, oh my heavens, he doesn't know who I am.
Oh
Sucked
boy.
it up for at that point, and got the cake, went to his parents' house, quietly made sure his parents didn't do anything to confuse him, because I did know at that point enough to know that it would be worse if he got too upset and confused. I said, look, he doesn't know who I am right now. And a lot of times in dementia, that happens fleetingly for a few hours, or with my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, it would happen at 4 or 5 o'clock at night, 2 or 3 days a week. But then by the next morning, he was fine. He knew exactly who she was. My
Hmm.
husband never recovered from that. Well, as far as I know, at some point he couldn't talk anymore, and I don't know, but that was the hardest thing I've ever had to accept. But my sister laughed at me because I called her. I said, well, we just had a big boohoo fest. I said, I'm sitting on him next to him on the couch. He's begging me to take him to where they are. They'll know where she is. To my office. I knew exactly what he meant. He wanted me to take him to my office because they would know where I was, because I was gone. And the
Yes.
worst part of it all was I had told him early in his diagnosis continuously. I said, honey, because he'd be scared, right? At first, frontotemporal dementia, they pretty quickly forget that they've got dementia. They don't know anymore. About 80% of people with dementia don't actually know they have dementia. They don't remember it.
Okay.
Okay, so only about 20% do. But frontal temporal dementia, it's actually extremely common. They don't know they have dementia anymore. But early in his diagnosis, when he did seem to know and he'd be scared about it, I would hold his hand and say, honey, I will always be here. You're not in this alone. I will always be here. And it just crushed me to think, what must he think? Now, the good news is he doesn't remember because he doesn't even know he has dementia anymore. But I thought, for all the times I told him I would always be here, and he thinks I'm not here. How horrifying, how terrible is that? So,
Right.
anyway, that was horrible, is the answer.
Oh gosh, it's just a knife to my heart to
Mm,
imagine what that was like for you.
yeah. And then I would say during the course, that was about 4 years, almost 5 years ago. And he would say he couldn't speak much near the end. But he would come around the corner with a big smile on his face, or I'd come in the door from being gone and he would get a big smile on his face, and he would come right up to me and he'd say, and frontal temporal dementia, they really can't speak very much. And he would say, I like. And I know he was telling me he loved me, right? And I'd say, I love you too, honey. So I don't know if that was me being his caregiver for the last 4 or 5 years that he loved me, but I do know he loved me because he really worked hard to make sure he could tell me.
Oh gosh, that's precious.
Yeah.
What ways of coping with his behavior turned out to be ineffective?
Yeah. Well, particularly with delusions, I'd say was the worst. And this is pretty common with dementia as well, and very common in frontotemporal dementia. Trying to convince him otherwise, even though when he forgot who I was, I did the best I could to try to convince him I was his wife. It
Yeah.
just upsets them. It makes them more agitated. It makes them more they're upset because they're frightened. Let's be clear. So it just makes them more frightened. So that's not a positive thing. So I learned, and this is also what I coach people. This is one of my favorite things to coach people on is get ready. If you have someone with dementia, Sue and I did our normal podcast are about 20 to 25 minutes. We did a 38-minute podcast on delusions. And I promise you, it's it's my favorite one. So I send people to that a lot. I say, just listen so that you're ready, because it not taking it personally that they don't know who you are, or that something strange is happening and they won't listen to you when you try to reason with them, and not trying to reason through a delusion. So trying to say, first, when you get that first pushback, like, um, uh, you know, I'm your wife. No, you're not. If you're ready, you swallow that for a second and you say, okay, my job is to put on my inner actress right now. And my job is to say, oh, well, you know, can I distract? Well, I want to go home. Well, how do that's probably frustrating. How about let's do that. But first, let's have some ice cream, see if you can distract, but just not fighting the delusion and trying to convince them, because that just makes them more upset, more angry, and more scared. So if you learn how to walk through the steps of getting through a delusion, you can come back out the other side, and you can get through it. Proof, I've done it a million times, and everybody's okay in the end. And you're not so upset, they're not so upset.
Because their perception in that moment is reality to them,
Exactly.
and you can't reason them out of it. You also said in the article, being right isn't what matters.
That's a lesson learned.
Out.
That's a lesson to learn, isn't it?
Oh gosh, that must be hard.
That's harder than anything. So, and it, because you're right. They are home, or
Yes. I understand that your husband, Kim, died about a year ago. What has
he
this
died. Actually, he died last month.
last month? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I'm
Yes, he
sorry.
died. That's okay. He died December 19th of this year. Yeah.
Only a month ago. I
Yeah. A little bit more than a month ago. My father died last January,
okay.
2024, after Parkinson's. My father-in-law with Alzheimer's died October 1st. And then my husband passed December 19th. So all three of the people that I was involved in caregiving passed away last year. It was quite the year.
Quite a year. I
Hmm.
are you able to share what this last month has been like for you?
Yes, I think it's amazing because number one, my reaction has been not at all what I expected. I thought I've had basically almost 10 years to get used to the idea, right? I knew he wasn't going to live. Um, he was in bed and we were just keeping him comfortable for 8 days. So I had 8 days to really get used to the idea. And yet the finality of it was just horrific. And you know this because you lost your husband.
Mhm,
When his body was no longer in my house, when his presence was no longer found,
mhm,
it was just so real, so real. Everything was the finality of how real it was crazy. And then I spent at least 2 weeks second guessing everything I did. My brain said, "You've done the very best job you can taking care of this man." My heart said, "Oh, but you could have done so much more."
yes.
So that took about 2 weeks. And I'd be curious if you went through the same thing. That took about 2 weeks to get through. And then there was a couple of weeks of just trying to figure out how to be alone in a house that did not have him in it
Yeah.
or any other people who were coming to help me. So I borrowed my son's dog. I don't
Oh,
have a dog. So I kept my son's dog for about 2 weeks. That helped a lot. And then I'd say I'm probably in the last couple of weeks or week just starting to settle in. And, it's not so, time really does help. It's not so terrible. If I think about it or talk about it, as you can tell, it upsets me, but I don't find myself like consumed with it like I did for probably the first 4 weeks.
I also cared for a terminally ill son
Oh,
for a
did you?
couple of years. And when he passed, I'm sure you've heard the term anticipatory grief.
No, I haven't. Tell me what that means. That's
Well, you were, you know, in the process of seeing your husband fail, there was grieving along the way.
Yes. I call
And,
that drip grief. Yes.
yeah. And knowing that eventually he would die.
Right.
I did a lot of grieving before Stephen's death. And after his death, I felt a lot of relief
Did
be-
you?
because his struggle with his life was over.
Mhm.
It was so hard to watch him struggle and to
Bless
watch
him.
him fail. And then, like you experienced, there was that, oh, I could have done it better. Maybe if I'd been a better mother, maybe if I'd been a better wife, you know. So
Yeah.
I went through that process as well of just accepting that I did the very best I could with the journey I was handed.
Yeah.
That my loved ones knew that they were loved and they loved me in return. And what more can we do?
That's it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is, I agree. It's very, I've kind of gotten into now a little bit of an angry phase where I'm mad about his life
Hmm.
and how unfair it is for him because he was 69 when he passed, but he got diagnosed when he was 60, and
Yeah.
how unfair it is that this is what his life was like. And so I'm in that stage right now, which is actually not so upsetting. You're mad, so you're not so upset. It's kind of a good thing.
Empowering to be mad.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of emotions in the years ahead.
Yeah.
Tell us about Sue Ryan and the Caregiver's Journey that you co-founded.
Thank you for asking. Sue and I were good friends and actually neighbors. So we worked together 35 years ago, and she actually moved. And when she moved to Atlanta, she moved into literally a condo that was, you could see it from our back porch.
Uh-huh.
So we were neighbors as well as work friends. And I had kept up with her through friends, but when I fell apart in my lack of self care, some friends said, "Have you talked to Sue? Her father and her husband has dementia." And I was like, "No, I didn't realize that." So I called her. She had moved to Florida at this point, and we reconnected. And she was a lifeline through some of the more difficult things. The let it go thing I learned from Sue. I called one day. I'm like, "I'm trying to cut his fingernails. He won't stay still. What am I going to do? Blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "Well, are you trying to cut them all at one time?" And I thought, "Well, yeah, yeah, of course I am. Why would I not be trying to cut them all at one time?" She said, "Let it go. Let it go. If you get one cut today, great. If you get another one cut tomorrow, great." So I learned a lot from Sue during the course of my journey. And when her husband passed away, about a year and a half ago, she came up to visit me and my husband, Kim. And during that visit, we were lamenting over how difficult it is for dementia family caregivers to get practical advice.
Yeah.
There's a lot of advice, but there's not a lot of detailed advice. Like, here's what you do when they come out of the bathroom and you've told them to go in and get dressed, and they come out and they put their bathrobe on and not their clothes. And here's what you can expect next, and here's how you handle it, and so on. Like I said, the delusion episode where we talk through, here's what you do when a delusion happens.
Yeah.
Action 1, action 2, action 3. So she said, "Well, I'm thinking about creating," and she had already written a book on caregiving at this point. And she said, "I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Would you like to do it with me?" So
Wow.
that blossomed into a podcast, a blog, a website, her caregiving book, some dementia family caregiver guides, and really a lot of additional things, an online course that we're in the process of revamping, a lot of additional things that really are practical solutions for dementia family caregivers. Like I said, we try to do our podcast. We try to keep it to 20 to 25 minutes, and it's extremely tip oriented. The one that came out today is caregiver self-care, but it is, here's the realities of caregiver self-care. Here's what you need to do. Tip 1. Here's what you do. Tip 2. And it's very matter of fact, but we tell stories about what worked and what didn't work for each of us. So there's context behind the tips, so you understand where it's coming from. We get a lot of positive feedback on how engaging it is, and at the same time, how practical it is. And we've already got over probably about 8,500 subscribers to our podcast. It's only been 6 months because
Wonderful.
people need this kind of detail. They really do. So anyway, that's what's going on. And we're going to continue to expand the resources we offer people to help dementia family caregivers because this is a growing crisis.
Well, just as she was a lifeline to you, that the two of you are together are forming a lifeline for thousands of other people.
Exactly. Exactly.
Stunned when I read that there are over 55 million people living with dementia worldwide.
Amazing. Yes. And of our listeners and Facebook followers and everything, only about 40% of those are in the Americas. About 60% are outside the Americas. So dementia is a massive problem across the world, even, of course, in the Americas, but everywhere. And it's the same challenge. A lot of cultures, of course, it's family caregiving is the only option. That's just the way they do it. So there's lots of need for help.
So I'm imagining then that you're gaining listeners or followers from all over the world.
Yes, very, very quickly. It's amazing. It's growing so fast. And we just transitioned to a not-for-profit because we felt like that was the spirit of what we're doing. Neither one of us take a salary to do this. So we transitioned to a not-for-profit so we can start to expand. And it's a resource we feel like, we need to, like you said, get out there and just like, not everybody's got a Sue to call.
It must be so gratifying for you and Sue to be able to help others navigate a course that was so difficult for you, difficult for anyone, but to pass on the lessons that you learned. You invested over, excuse me, 70 hours to become a certified caregiving consultant. What does that title mean?
I felt like before we started the podcast, I had three caregiving experiences, but I felt like I needed a broader education just as a responsible person. So there is a program where you can get certified as a caregiving consultant, and it is a pretty extensive program, as you can tell, 70 hours on the average.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went through that program and learned how to interact, what to expect. For example, the relief that you felt with your son, one of the most common things, and people don't want to talk about it, is when someone passes away, they feel relief. So those are the kinds of things I learned so much about in that training, that it helped me have a much broader view of what caregivers go through. And I'm really happy I did it because I think it helps me with, even though most of our advice is through podcasts or blogs or tools that we create, it helped me really understand what was common, not just in my experience, but among caregivers in general.
You said you'd love to spark a movement to address what you call the middle class caregiving crisis. What is that?
I hear so often from people, with my father-in-law, we were able to get VA support, which was great. It gives not a lot, 16 hours of caregiving a week, but we used 4 hour days. That gave us some level of caregiving to help my mother-in-law out. If you don't, in today's world, if you don't have a lot of money, you can apply for caregiving support from Medicaid. And it's actually pretty good from what I've been able to get from other people. The VA can give you support as well. So there's a little bit of support you can get from the VA. And if you have a decent amount of money, you can afford to pay caregivers to come into your home. But if you're in the middle, I was talking to my housekeeper the other day. Her mother's got dementia. She makes Social Security. Her Social Security paycheck is a little bit too much to qualify for Medicaid,
Oh dear.
but not where near enough to pay for caregivers to come into their home.
Right.
You're stuck in this middle place that you can't afford what needs to happen. And dementia, 55 million people with dementia today, somewhere between 120 and 140 million by 2050. It's going to double in size. Now, there's lots of good research out there. Cross your fingers and hope we can come up with a way to stop that. But we've got to help people, because if you're a family caregiver and you are literally out there on your own without any way to afford the kind of support that you need, what a terrible situation, both for your care receiver and for yourself. So I just feel like that's got to be tackled. There are some things going on with Medicare right now to help. There's a pilot program going on to help come up with training for family caregivers. So that's good. It's got to get through the pilot program and turn into an actual program. But that's just the US. Across the world, I talk to people all over the world, and this is a challenge everywhere.
You said you'd love to have a conversation with Bill Gates. Tell us what would take place in that conversation.
One of my favorite things about Bill Gates is he gets things done. That he doesn't just, fund foundations and then walk away. It really feels like their foundations all make tangible impacts on whatever the topic is.
Mhm.
And I believe his father had Alzheimer's, and he's put a lot of effort into funding dementia research and such. And so I think, frankly, connecting with the conversation we just had about this sort of gap in family caregiving, the middle-class family caregiving crisis, how do we approach that gap and do something tangible to try to fix it?
Yes. He is he's not just an idea man,
It's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Everything, for those of you who are watching this video or reading the article, everything Nancy and Sue do can be found on their website, thecaregiversjourney.com. I'm so impressed and so grateful for how you're turning your experience into practical help for others. Thank you for having that passion to help others so that they aren't as alone as you were in the beginning.
So true. And I just want people to learn faster and easier than I did. So let's help other family caregivers get through this process as simply as possible, and help the care receivers have the best quality of life they can, because their caregiver knows what they're doing and has the right attitude while they're doing it.
Yes. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Nancy?
I appreciate you taking the time to do this extra level of interview beyond just the magazine. Hopefully, if just a handful of people have a better caregiving experience because of this, it's been a real accomplishment. So thank you.
Well, that's my desire as well. So thank you again for joining me today and spending these few minutes. And again, for the viewers, you can go to the website, thecaregiversjourney.com, to find amazing resources to help you on your journey. Thank you again, Nancy, and please give Sue my thanks as well for the work the two of you are doing together. And I hope your day today is a lovely, peaceful day.
Thank you so much.